Good morning, Sociology 324 students. I wanted to take a few minutes. I got an email asking for some clarification about the first SPSS assignment. And since you're unfamiliar with the software, I thought I would give you a short walkthrough on what SPSS looks like. But I want to start with a discussion of how to use the data files that I gave you for the assignment. So let me share my screen and show you a couple of these files that we're working with this week or for this assignment. So the first one I want to show you is the Sociology 324 questionnaire. And this is what the questionnaire would look like for someone receiving it to fill out the survey. So there's a title, some instructions about how to fill out the survey, and then the questions are broken up into sections. So the first section is on attitudes and behaviors, the second section is on demographics, and so on. I want to point out a couple of these questions in the way that they're organized and structured, because then that connects us to what the next file I'm going to show you, which is the code book, which tells us how we're going to enter the data into the computer, into the spreadsheet. So the first set of questions are what we call matrix questions, which means that you have a large number of questions grouped together that have the same set of response categories. So the first question is, I am involved in politics. And it gives you 5 response categories or options: strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. This is called a Likert scale question, which is named after, I think, the guy named Likert who developed this structure. So this is a Likert question. Whenever you see a strongly agree to strongly disagree, strongly approve to strongly disapprove, those are what we call Likert scale questions. So the first question, I am involved in politics. Over on the left-hand side, you see Q1. That's going to be what we use in creating our data file to mark that question. So if someone answers strongly agree to that, they're going to have that X'd in. So that's what you would do if you were filling out the survey. So there's a series of questions of that type. And then the second section are demographic questions. So we have gender, we have race, ethnicity, age, citizenship status, and the response categories are on the next page for that question, so I'll show you in a second. This race ethnicity question has 5 different options, and then an other, and then a blank. So I'm going to come back to that, but I want you to think about if you were filling out the survey and you marked other, you would then write something in that blank about your racial ethnic identity. Right? So think about how people would answer the question. And under the question age, you would put the number in for how many years old you are. Right? So that's how that question would be answered. So think about that, because when you're doing the data entry part of it, it's important to think about how that question would be answered on the survey. So here we have home and state country, home state or country. That would also be something that you would fill out. You would write in the answer. Do you have any children? Yes, no, and then the next question, if so, how many? Notice that if you don't have children, it says to skip to question 23. So you would skip question 22 and go on to 23. That'll be important again in a minute, so that's why I'm pointing that out. The rest of these questions are just sort of select the box questions: social class, educational attainment, are you a first-generation college student, how many hours a week do you work, how many of your educational living expenses are you providing yourself as opposed to being provided by your parents or guardians. And then the last question here, question 32, what social networking websites do you use? This question is a please check all that apply. The rest of these, there was one answer that you would select, not more than one. So when we get to entering this one in, we're going to enter it in a little bit differently. So here are some social media platforms, and you check all that apply. And then there is an other box here, and again, you would write in something else that you might use. And I noticed that Google Plus is on here, which tells you the age of this questionnaire. I don't think anybody's using Google Plus anymore. I'm not even sure Google Plus exists anymore. So that's it's an interesting situation. So our survey is getting outdated, and there are new social media platforms that are not listed on here that would be what that other would include. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to share what we call the codebook. So whenever you are doing a survey or doing some other kinds of data analysis, including content analysis, you create a codebook. And the codebook is essentially a guide for how that data is going to be entered into your software program for running data analysis. So the codebook looks a lot like the questionnaire. It has everything listed out. So the first question, again, Q1, I am involved in politics. And we have all of our response categories, again, are strongly agree to strongly disagree. But we've assigned those numeric values. When we enter the data into SPSS, we're going to enter the number. We're not going to write out strongly agree. It makes it quicker for data entry. It makes it less likely that we make a mistake. I know that often when I'm doing data entry, if I've had to write out an answer, then, even if it's just a single word, my spelling may not be just right because my typing isn't great. And so I might have it listed multiple different ways when I type it in really quickly. And then if I'm trying to count how many answers were agree and I misspelled agree 3 or 4 times, those aren't going to get counted in, right? So that's one of the reasons why we use those numbers. It makes it quicker, first of all, and that's important when you're doing data entry. But it also it reduces the likelihood of making spelling errors, which would make it hard to capture that data. So now we can count how many times someone answered agree, which is the category 2. So we'll count how many times somebody answered 2, and that way we don't have to be concerned about spelling errors and typos as much. So as we scroll down through the codebook, every single question is listed, and also the possible response categories for the numbers that you would enter for the different answers that people would give. Notice that they all have this extra missing, and that's coded as a 9. We typically use 9s or series of 9s for coding missing data. And what's missing data? In this case, it's you were supposed to answer the question, but you didn't. So someone skipped it, they skipped over it. There are all kinds of reasons people don't answer questions. It's too personal, they don't want you to know, it's private, or they literally just missed it because they were answering down the list and they bumped down to the next question. I'm sure you've done that on an exam before, right? You missed bubbling one in. The same thing happens when you're filling out surveys. So all of these questions are part of that matrix that was the first section. If we go down to the demographics, we also have, again, our missing options. Notice for the race and ethnicity question here, there's that 6 category where we're assigning the number 6. And then there's an extra little thing in here, so 16A. And so what we've done with 16A is if somebody marked other and then filled out, wrote in that line some other racial ethnic category, then that's where we would type that in. So we actually have to create a separate variable for that, a separate line for that in our spreadsheet, because it doesn't go into one of those numeric responses. So when someone writes something out, we're going to need, we call it a string field in SPSS, or a text field is what you would generally call it in a spreadsheet program. So we're going to need a space to type in what someone said. And so we have to create a separate variable for that to be able to write in that response. Because in the first variable, race, ethnicity, we just have numbers as the possible answers. I'm going to do that in a few places. Notice in age, I don't have any response category, so it's not 18 equals 18, 19 equals 19, because we know people report their age generally when they're grown up. They report their age in whole numbers, so they don't say that they're 17 and a half anymore. If they do, we'll figure out what to do with that. So we would enter that data, whatever number they gave us, that would be our numeric response. So we don't need to include that. We would probably include 99 for missing, or because we would assume that someone who's 99 might not be filling out the survey, or if we want to be extra careful, we would use 999 for missing. So if somebody didn't report their age, we would use a series of 9s to show that that was a missing data. How do we know whether to use 9 or 99 or 999? Well, it depends on what the possible responses are. If 9 is a valid response, then we would need to use 99. If 99 could be a valid response, and it could be for age, we would use 3 9s to designate the missing response category. Home and state country, home state country, that is also one of those fill in the blank. So that would be what we call a string character. And I'll show you that in the next tutorial, the next video on SPSS, because I don't want these to get too long. So I'm going to split them in half. We scroll down. The other thing that I want to show you is this last question on the survey, which is what social networking websites do you use? Please check all that apply. Notice that we can't just say 1 equals Twitter, 2 equals Instagram, 3 equals Google+, because check all that apply means that they could mark more than one box in those responses because they might use more than one platform. I know I have dabbled in 3 of these or 4 of these different platforms myself, and not Google+, because I'm over it. So is everybody else. So I'm going to create separate variables for each one of the responses. So question 32A is for Twitter. Question 32B is for Instagram. Question 32C, and they're all going to have 1 if marked, 0 if not marked. So here, not marking it isn't the same as missing data. So I don't have to do a 9 or a 99. Okay, so if they don't mark any of them, I'm going to assume they're not on those platforms. So 1 if marked, 0 if not marked. And then at the very bottom, I have social networking other. And again, that's one of those string or text fields where I'm going to write out whatever they said. Maybe they're using Discord, right, which is another platform that didn't exist when this survey came out. I did remember that there's one other thing I want to show you. And that is a question of not applicable. So I remember I had that children question, right? Do you have any children? If no, skip to question 23 because question 22 doesn't apply to you. So, excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Okay, so if you have, do you have any children? If no, please skip to question 23. So if you said yes, then you would answer question 22. If you said no, you would not. And so in this case, question 22, if somebody didn't answer it, there are 2 possibilities. Either they didn't answer it because it didn't apply to them because they didn't have any children and they were supposed to skip it, or they said they had children, but they didn't answer it, which is missing, right? So there should be data in that question. There should be an answer, but there isn't one. So we have to add another category to separate out didn't answer the question and they should have, or it didn't apply to them. So we add 8s. So we use 9s for missing data. We use 8s for not applicable. So this question didn't apply to them if they answered no to the previous question. So we code that as 88, or because it's possible they could have more than 10 children. So we're going to use 88 and 99 instead of 8 and 9. Okay. So I think that that explains how the survey is constructed and how the code book is constructed. So in the next video, what I'll do is to talk a little bit about how that gets transformed into an SPSS file when you're starting with a blank file.